Today, I murdered my professor. I almost felt bad, if it weren't for the fact that he was thinking of failing me. See, it's my last semester here at this garbage dump of a university, and I've spent more time than most here as an undergrad. I finally knew what I wanted to do with my life, and staying here just made me feel like I was stagnating, suffocating. I could finally see a way out of this hellhole, and the only thing standing in the way of my freedom was this professor. I calmly removed my hands from around his neck and walked away from his lifeless corpse. I felt a twinge of satisfaction. This professor had been giving the entire class a hard time all semester, what with his stupid exams and demanding assignments. It was all getting to be a bit much. He was getting to be a little too much. I waited for a few seconds, listening for any footsteps or voices that would indicate that someone was outside his office door. Not a sound could be heard from where I was standing. But who am I kidding? Who would even be in this part of the building at this time? It's outside of his office hours. Besides, no one goes to see him in his office anyway. I picked up my bag from the chair I left it on, walked to the door, and rested my hand on the door handle. I turned to look at the still body one more time. It was just as I had left him, sitting in his chair with his head lolled back, dark blue-black bruises starting to appear where my fingers had gripped his neck so firmly. I turned back to the door and turned the handle. I cracked it open just enough to allow my body to slip out, but not enough to allow for anyone to see inside of the office, if there was anyone outside. But there was no one outside. Just in case there was anyone hidden in the hall, I said, "Thank you, Professor. Have a nice weekend," and closed the door behind me. I walked back to my dorm, skipping my next class because I felt like it. I stopped by the campus store so I could buy a soda and a bag of chips and continued on my way. When I got to my room, I sat down on my bed and checked my phone to see if I had gotten any messages. Nope, no messages. That was to be expected. I sighed and laid down. I thought about my other classes and thanked God that I was doing well in those. Killing one professor was exhausting enough. I need to work out more often. I woke up in the middle of the night. Not because of anything in particular, I just woke up. I laid there in the dark for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, seeing if I would fall back asleep. But I didn't. I felt the covers for my phone and found it. I switched on the screen and was temporarily blinded by the bright light emanating from the smartphone. I involuntarily hissed and quickly turned the brightness down. I froze. Among the many YouTube and Twitter notifications was an email from one of my professors, the one who shouldn't be able to compose any emails. The subject line read, "Assignment number 13 deadline pushed to next Thursday." How did he send that email? He was dead. I mean, I made sure of that myself. I took some deep, steadying breaths, convincing myself that he must have composed that email beforehand and scheduled it to go out at 9:30 p.m. Yeah, that would have to be it. There was no way he was still alive. I put my phone on the bedside table and managed to drift back to sleep. My phone's alarm woke me up late next morning. Groggily, I reached over to where I left my phone in the middle of the night. I dismissed the alarm and lay down for a few seconds before I sat up. I didn't have any classes today, so I took my time watching YouTube videos, only half paying attention to them, as I was distracted by yesterday's events. I couldn't stop thinking about that email. What if my attempt was just that? An attempt? I decided that I would go to his office today to check to see if his body was still there. That is, if someone else hadn't found it first. I pulled on a fresh set of clothes, put on my sneakers, and set out for my professor's office. When I got there, I found no one in the hallways. No police, campus or otherwise, and no hysterical students forever scarred after finding the corpse of their former professor. I started to calm down. I walked up to his door and knocked twice, with no response. I turned the handle and opened the door. Relief flooded through me. There he was. I stepped in his office and closed the door, and when I turned to look at him, I noticed something. I could see that his neck was bruised blue and black from when I strangled him the day before, but I noticed that he was wearing a jacket on top of the sweater he had been in yesterday. I stepped closer to him, keeping an eye on the part of his chest that wasn't covered by the jacket. That's when I smelled it. The smell of stale blood. When I reached the front of his desk, I saw the dark colour of partially dried blood on his shirt, and I froze. Someone must have came after me and stabbed him. But why would anyone stab somebody who was already dead? I whipped around and ran out of his office, terrified of what I had just seen. I ran right into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat in the corner, shaking, and was there for what seemed like hours, trying to calm down. I couldn't let other people see me like this, or else they would know I had seen something horrifying, and I also wanted to distance myself from this as much as possible. Eventually, I slowed my breathing to its normal pace. I checked the time on my phone and saw that I had a new email. I opened it and started hyperventilating again. It was an email from my dead professor. The subject line read, "I know what you did." I promptly deleted the email, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. With a ding, I knew that I had another notification. I turned on the screen and saw that it was yet another email from that professor. This time, the subject line read, "Help me. Open the door." The second I finished reading it, I could hear a faint scratching at the door. I was paralyzed. Even if I wanted to escape, I couldn't. There was only one way in and out of the bathroom, and I didn't want to find out what would happen if I tried opening that door. Suddenly, the scratching turned into knocking. Slow at first, but soon turned frantic. Tears of terror started flowing down my face as I struggled to not make a sound. I got another notification on my phone, and without checking, I knew it was another message from my deceased professor. I was too terrified to check it, so I turned it off, stayed in the corner of the bathroom, on the floor, curled up in a ball on my side, still crying. The knocking was faster now. I started to hear whispers on the other side of the door, but the voice was too low for me to hear from where I was, and I sure as hell wasn't going to move any closer to that door, even if I could manage to move. The knocking stopped, and I gasped and covered my mouth. I could hear the whispering now. Whoever or whatever was on the other side of that door was saying, "Let me in," over and over in a raspy voice. After a few minutes, I relaxed a little bit and the tears stopped. I mean, if this thing really could hurt me, it would have broken down the door and done it already. The second that thought crossed my mind, the whispering stopped. Bang! It was as if someone had kicked the door. I gasped and my body tensed up again. I waited for an hour, and when I was sure that the thing was gone, I uncurled myself and stood up, still shaky. I opened the door slowly and checked to see if I could see anything out of the ordinary, but I saw nothing, not even any marks on the door. I picked up my phone, turned it back on, and stepped out of the bathroom. I had a few missed calls from my parents, so I called them back. I talked to them for a couple of minutes while I walked back in the direction of my dead professor's office. I said goodbye and hung up when I was in front of his door. I rested my hand on the doorknob, heart pounding hard and fast in my chest. I slowly opened the door and peeked inside. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. There weren't even any bloodstains on his chair. I slammed the door and started panicking again. My phone chimed, and I unlocked to see a dozen emails from him. They had all been sent while I had locked myself in the bathroom. All of them had the same subject lines: "Let me in." I deleted all 12 of the messages and walked swiftly to my dorm. The second I stepped into the building, I got one last notification, and my heart dropped. This time, the subject line read, "See you in class tomorrow." It wasn't my fault. We had a gorgeous spring day last week, so I called up a few buddies to have an impromptu celebration. I fired up the grill for the first time this year, stocked the cooler with beer, and we had a blast. I guess we were a little loud, but nothing too out of control. Just some old friends getting together, chatting rubbish, while my wife Hayley was out with her friends. Around the time it started to get dark, I heard my neighbour shout, "Hey!" I whipped around and saw his crew-cut head sticking up over the fence. He'd been on a few tours of duty in Afghanistan, and he was still very much a military dude. The last thing I wanted to see was him staring right down, looking ticked off. "You assholes, keep it down!" "So sorry, Tucker," I yelled, giving a good-natured wave. "We will." Then I turned to my friends. "Alright guys," I said, "maybe we better go inside." We went in and kept drinking. It was a Saturday, and none of us had to work on Sunday. It was the first time we'd all been hanging out in the same place for years, and we wanted to make a night of it. Eventually, we ran out of beer. There's a convenience store right across the street from my house. "Gonna make a run," I said, a little drunk. "Get more beer." I did that as my friends hung out and chatted away. When I got back, we drank some more. When the wife came home, we were all plastered and everyone got cabs home. The next morning, at 6:00, I was dragged out of slumber by the sound of someone banging at my front door. If I were 21, I would have been good to go, then and there. But I'm not 21. I'm 36. It felt like somebody had jammed a dagger that had 1,000 other tiny daggers growing out of it straight into the center of my brain. My ears felt like they were bleeding. My tongue felt like somebody had cut it out of my mouth, soaked it in harsh chemicals all night, and then sewn it back in, without being very careful about it. I felt like crap, but the banging persisted. I got out of bed, only half able to feel my body, and the half that I could feel felt like somebody was poking me with electric shockers, particularly my eyeballs. They felt like they were on fire. Somehow I made it to the front door. I peeked out the window and saw my neighbour, Tucker, there, veins popping out of his neck, looking on the verge of murder. "Oh crap. I know you're in there, Crenshaw," he yelled. "Open the damn door." Without thinking about it too much, I opened the door. He was standing there, holding what looked like a condom filled with urine, tied off at the top like a balloon. "You think this is funny?" he asked. My head wasn't just spinning, it was on the gravitron. No, I said. But what is it? Why are you here? Don't play dumb, said Tucker. I know you did this. Threw this in my yard. I was actually honestly offended. It wasn't me, I said. It was probably some asshole from across the street. As I mentioned, there is a store across the street. Litter and all sorts of bizarre things are constantly being blown or thrown from the customers there into my front yard. That's where, through the hangover haze, I guessed the pea condom had come from. I certainly hadn't put it there. You know what I did over in Afghanistan, Crenshaw? Tucker asked. I shook my head. I specialized in projectile IEDs. I got to know the physics of it all. I know where this disgusting piece of trash came from. It came from your porch. I shook my head again. No, sir, I said. Then I started to get a little ticked off myself. It wasn't me, and you have no right coming here accusing me of doing something so juvenile. Tucker made a weird growling noise, clicked his heels together, and then spun around, keeping his back stiff as a board the whole time. Then he walked back to the sidewalk and around the fence, separating his yard from mine. I went back to bed. By 10 a.m., I was finally ready to face the world. Haley was already up and about. I still had a bad hangover, but with some Tylenol and coffee, I figured I would live. The first thing I did was look at my phone. There was a text from my friend Steve there. Here is what it read. How did Tucker the Mucker like the old condo bomb? Launched it while you were at the store, lol. Oh no. I jumped out of bed and threw on a robe. I ran through the living room, past my wife who was reading a book. Rob? She asked. I kept running. I made it to the front door and threw it open, just in time to see Tucker, accidentally, back his car into our trash bin. I watched as 3 bags of trash flew through the air and exploded upon impact with our muddy yard. Overheard the crows already circling, then took a tall rubber out of there and sped off down the road. Okay, I thought, surveying the mess strewn all over my yard, which included a chicken carcass, used maxi pads, and bits of broken glass. Fair enough, Tucker. I guess that's fair enough. I wish I had left it at that. I really do. But later, when I was out cleaning up, I really started to feel the rage boil. It wasn't my fault that Steve had thrown that condom over into Tucker's yard. I hadn't known anything about it until Tucker had come to my door at 6 o'clock in the bloody morning. And when I had found out about it, I was on my way to apologize in person, first thing. And what was my reward? I plucked slimy eggshells off the ground and put it into the new bag. Then my phone buzzed. I wiped my hand on my pants and checked it. Another text from Steve. Look man, really sorry about causing trouble with your neighbor. Hopefully he didn't get too mad. Let me make it up to you by buying a couple of rounds. If you're as hungover as me, you'll need them. It was true. Despite the Tylenol and the extra sleep, I still had a nasty hangover. I'd even puked once, picking up all of that wet, stinking trash. I agreed to have a drink or two out. By midnight, we were wasted. Can't believe that crazy jerk-off knocked all that trash into your yard, said Steve. The only reason I did the condom thing in the first place was because he was such a dick about us having a good time. Sergeant Payne or whatever the hell, you know. Who does this asshole think he is anyway? If I'd been sober, my answer might have been, well, he put his life on the line in the name of our country. I may not agree with the war, but he doesn't deserve to come back to some drunk idiots being loud and hurling a condom into his yard. But I wasn't sober, so this is what I said instead. Yeah, screw that guy. You got a cat? Asked Steve. Sure, 2 of them. Good, and here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take the bag where you put all that cat crap and lumps of pea litter, we're going to take that bag and we're going to chuck it at old Tucker's front door. A little cat crap bomb for him to wake up to, you know? And that's exactly what we did. The next day, I laid low. Haley was mad, but I called in sick to work and went back to sleep. No more drinking, I told myself, as I was drifting back off. No more drinking. I woke up at noon, feeling clear-headed for the first time in 2 days, and the realization of what Steve and I had done hit me like, well, a bag of cat crap to the face. I threw on some pants and ran outside. Tucker didn't have a job, and I was hoping that he was still at home so that I could apologize, in earnest, for acting so horribly. Tucker was at home and answered the door the moment I rang the bell. He was smiling. I don't think I'd ever seen Tucker smile before that. "Have some fun last night, did we, Crenshaw?" he asked in a good-natured tone. "Yeah, about that. Listen, man, I'm really sorry. That was over the line, no excuses." Tucker went on smiling. We did let things get a bit out of hand, didn't we? A snafu. But on my list of things getting out of hand, Crenshaw, it doesn't even rank. So let's just put it behind us, What do you say? He offered his hand and I took it. As we were shaking, it felt like he was crushing me. But I figured that's just how these macho guys are. He kept smiling. "Let me make it up to you," I said. "There's no need, Crenshaw. We're good." "Really?" "Really," he said, still smiling. And for about a week, I really did let myself believe that we were good. But all that time, Tucker was filling my garden shed with every bit of garbage in the entire neighborhood. Today was another fine day. The sun was shining, the birds were pulling worms out of the ground. The kind of day where you think about things growing and thriving instead of going cold and dying. Haley and I decided we would lay the groundwork for our garden. That's when I saw it. Rather, that's when I smelled it. It hit me when I was about 10 feet away. The stench of thousands of different things rotting and oozing. I gagged. Then I heard the buzz of flies. I smelled it. Then I heard it. Then I saw it through the window. Then I puked. The shed behind our house was packed wall to wall with rancid garbage. I saw shadows scampering over it. I didn't know if they were rats or raccoons or what. I saw rotting apples and coffee grinds and used tissues and crap-filled diapers and mushy grey material and leftover chili and bones and the offcuts of raw meat and used condoms filled with something other than urine and empty packets of ketchup and ants crawling over it. And yes, they were rats. There was a dead one there, on top of it all. Green mold, yellow mold, black mold, brown mold, a rainbow of mold. I puked once again and thought about what to do next. Go to the police? It had to be a crime to stuff garbage into your neighbour's shed. But wasn't it also a crime to throw a bag of cat feces at your neighbour's door? Did I really want to involve the police? As I stood there, trying to form a plan, or at least a useful thought, I heard a low growl coming from inside the shed. I took a step back. There's probably a rabid raccoon in there, I thought. Then the door started to rattle. I don't think that's a raccoon. I took another step back, and then the shrieking started. It sounded like a pterodactyl. I mean, nobody's ever really heard one of those, but we all know what they're supposed to sound like, right? I guess from movies. Just this terrible screeching that makes your eardrums quiver in pain. The door stopped rattling. It started banging. I took several steps back on legs that were shaking uncontrollably and were now also briefly warm and fully wet with urine as the door splintered apart. standing there in front of me was a creature that I could not comprehend. It was green and black and wet, and still screeching horribly, though I could see no mouth. It was all of the bits of garbage congealed together, stewed together, formed into a shape that was roughly human, with 2 legs, 2 arms, a head that was jerking uncontrollably, and even, I noted, a garbage penis composed of crumpled newspapers and what I assumed was mustard. It had a pepperoni slice for one eye and a bottle cap for the other. Its hair was a mixture of some kind of actual hair, like from people or a pet picked up by a vacuum, and strands of spaghetti. One of its fingers was an empty toilet paper roll, and another looked like a toothpick. It lurched towards me, still shrieking. I turned to run. As I did so, I saw 2 people looking at me. First was my wife, standing in the open doorway of the side entrance to our house, totally in shock. The second was Tucker, peering out from his second floor, holding back the curtains, frowning. Then the curtain closed, and I couldn't see him. The creature took a squishy step towards me, reaching out a hand that had a large syringe as one of the fingers. I ran. I looked behind me to see the monster lurch unsteadily, but definitely in my direction. I made it to my side door, shoved Haley inside, and slammed the door shut behind me. "What the hell is that?" Haley asked. "I don't know," I said. "Some kind of trash monster? I think we should call the police." Then we heard a loud bang, rising above and then silencing the shrieking. I looked out the window to see Tucker out there, with a large gun pointed at the trash monster. The creature had a bullet hole in the middle of its monstrous head. I watched in horrified amazement as it plucked a watermelon rind covered in ants from its elbow and stuck it into the hole, plugging it up. The thing took a step toward Tucker, who fired off another round in response. The bullet hit its target, but didn't slow it down. Tucker fired again and again, before finally retreating a bit. But he wasn't fast enough. The trash monster was upon him, in a way that is difficult to describe, for several reasons. The creature's arms stretched out like bubblegum, and indeed appeared to be at least partially composed of such. It kept stretching and stretching, looping around Tucker's neck, choking him. Then the other hand produced a plastic bag, apparently from somewhere inside the creature's back. It placed the bag over Tucker's head and tied it off with the arm that was still stretching and wrapping around his neck. Tucker kicked and struggled, but not for long. He slumped to the ground, obviously dead, as the creature turned its attention towards my house. I called 911. As soon as I was off the phone, the monster collapsed into a pile of inanimate garbage. Now the police are headed here, and I have a dead body and a pile of garbage in my yard. And I don't know what to do. It was a bit of a dry day. Of course, around these parts of the globe, feeling uncomfortably dry in every part of the body would be pretty normal, in most terms of context anyway. Cities inside the Philippines have been known to be dense, making the already intense heat even warmer, and I'm no stranger to that. But of course, this didn't mean I had become completely immune by it either. The climate wasn't any different at the local bus station. Despite it being a big open space with a roof on top of us, the buses made the place feel a little more cramped than it really was. That, and the running engines of any of the vehicles in the area made the air less natural. I ended up coughing up a storm when I practically inhaled the smoke of a car passing by me as I got there. Normally, I'd take a jeep or a taxi to work, but my job called for a long, but temporary out-of-town stay somewhere farther than our usual work spot. How we got there wasn't any of the company's concern though, so we were left with finding our own way of transportation. I guess there isn't much use to complain about that, as if they'll actually listen to the employees one of these days. I had everything ready. Luggage, ticket, money. I was good to go. All I had to do was wait in line. The really, really long line. Though I knew I already had a seat in the gargantuan vehicle, seeing the people in front of me was pretty degrading. Almost every single one of the passengers had their own sets of bags and suitcases to be put in the bottom compartment, and a lot of them stood by while the station's employees loaded their things in the bus, blocking the doors to get inside. I guess they were just making sure their stuff wouldn't get beaten up or anything. Hearing about different news posts about workers throwing people's things in the bus could make any person think twice about them. It was beyond annoying still, and it looked like I wasn't the only one getting frustrated over this. Low scowls and silent curses were being muttered both in front and behind me. But that wasn't the only thing I heard. Out of nowhere, I could hear the smooth and enticing notes of a saxophone being played. The way the melody was done and how it just seemed to flow perfectly into my ear made me realize that whoever was playing this currently unknown song wasn't just some amateur. I looked around and soon saw the tall man playing the instrument beside the bus itself. How he got there without me noticing, I had no idea. But hey, didn't mean I was complaining. Strange how security wasn't doing anything about him, but I guess he wasn't really causing trouble. If anything, he was giving us something to balance out the negativity. The saxophone would always be something that I truly loved to listen to, though I couldn't play one myself. The amazing notes this mysterious man played somewhat made me forget how slow everything was going during those frustrating set of minutes. I couldn't recognize what song he was playing. It transitioned between a somewhat slow and smooth pace to a fast and active chorus, soothing the ears, while at the same time making my heart race with excitement. It got me wondering just who was this guy? Street performers weren't really common, and if there were any, the bus station would be the last place you'd expect to see one. He didn't look too much like a foreigner, but somehow, it felt like he wasn't someone who was a Filipino either. He wore a red jacket and grey jeans, with pitch black sunglasses covering his eyes. With a shining saxophone in his hands, I didn't think he'd be someone with low funds. I assumed he was just someone who wanted to give out a performance to the public. Because of that thought, I had a good sense of respect to the guy. It wasn't every day that people would just go outside and perform for the fun of it, and it wasn't often that I get to hear someone playing jazz like that either. That being said, as I found myself snapping my fingers and tapping my foot to the music, I noticed the black fedora lying on the floor beside him. Immediately, I thought that was probably meant for collecting any kind of donations. From where I was, I could clearly see that it was completely empty. I was kind of bothered by that. Out of all the people that passed by him over the past half hour, not one of them left a single coin. I mean, come on. Even if you're not a fan of the genre, he at least deserves some sort of payment for his performance. Before I knew it, I was in front of the line. A grumpy employee of the station began to load my bags inside the bottom compartment. While he did, I took out a 100 peso bill out of my wallet and slowly walked towards the saxophone player. As if on cue, the song he was playing finished as I got up to him. I gave him a warm smile before dropping the bill in the hat. Looking back at him, I saw him smiling too, showing off a good set of white teeth. "Thanks for the show, man. It was awesome," I complimented. He simply shrugged, not saying a word. I wasn't bothered by his silence too much. I didn't really have time to chat with him either. I only gave him a quick nod, along with another thank you, and headed inside the bus. I was seated right next to the window, parallel to the side of the entrance doors. Getting comfy in my seat, or at least as best as I could, I gazed outside the glass pane beside me. Immediately, I saw the familiar, tall figure of the saxophone player, only about a foot away, a grin on his face. I waved at him, and he waved back. The bus soon rattled to life as the engine started, and, out of nowhere, the guy took off his shades, revealing two eyes that stared directly at me, an odd look on his face that made me feel uneasy as he did. He looked like he was laughing, all to himself, almost like he had saw something funny that I wasn't seeing. The bus started moving not long after, and I couldn't help but keep my eyes locked with his. He didn't move. He just turned his head as we sped away, eventually coming out of sight. I fidgeted back into a proper sitting position, unsure that what had happened was even real or not. Whatever the case, I had a hard time trying to think of something else other than that odd man's stare and giggling. What the hell was he laughing about? It took about an hour and a half before I got to my stop. Dropping my feet onto the sidewalk, I could faintly see the top floors of the hotel my job had required us to check in just a few streets away from where I was. Even with my luggage in hand, I could walk my way there without too many problems. Time would be annoying though, making me debate the thought of hitching another ride or not as I took out my bags. But all my thoughts were immediately drowned out after hearing a familiar song, one played by a saxophone. A cold sweat slid down my neck. Whether it was because of the heat or what I heard was not something I could decide. I frantically searched everywhere, trying to find whoever it was playing the song and hoping that it wasn't. There he was. The overpass behind me, a toll bridge running from one side of the highway to the other, packed with pedestrians moving back and forth, up and down its stairs. Among those people, I saw him. The very same saxophone player. Despite all the excess noise around us, I could hear him play the song very clearly, as if I was listening to his own personal radio frequency with my ears. I stood there, desperately trying to figure out how a man can outrun a bus with no traffic that passed several miles. My brain kept telling itself that it was impossible, but just seeing him there somehow made it harder for me to believe. I kept staring at him, and though he had dark sunglasses on, it felt like he knew I was there, and he was returning my gaze with his. The song ended once again, and when it did, he turned his head towards me. The way he slowly smiled chilled me. He raised his left arm and waved at me. I didn't dare wave back. I heard the bus beside me starting its engine, soon beginning to depart. Still, I couldn't take my eyes away from him. He stopped waving, then shook his head in disapproval. It felt like he was mocking someone. I don't know if it was either me or someone else. Without warning, he outstretched his hand and pointed somewhere, his sinister smile seeming to grow even larger. I turned to look, but only saw the bus I was previously on waiting for a stoplight to change. I turned back, and he was gone. I looked for him everywhere, on the overpass and below it. He simply wasn't there. He vanished out of sight without a single hint of his presence leaving a trace. An alarm from my wristwatch began to beep, and it didn't take long before I remembered why I had gone there in the first place. Turning back to where I was headed, I started walking down the busy sidewalks, confused and frightened thoughts intermingling with certain plans for the day. I came to a full stop again, hearing a loud crash, and had my left ears ringing. Screams were heard all over the streets as many people ran away, others taking out their phones to either call for authorities or record the disaster that was happening in front of them. In front of me was the bus I had taken earlier, toppled over and most of it crushed after colliding with an oncoming truck and eventually hitting a telephone pole. Brian caught me about half a mile from my house. The kid was actually hiding behind a tree, if you can believe it. God knows how I didn't see him. I was walking back from the bus stop, winding along the country lane that leads me home, and the next thing I knew, he jumped out onto the road in front of me. "Hey, weirdo." Brian stood on the tarmac, panting. His chubby face was red and sweat-stained. I already knew what had happened. Brian lives a few miles from me in a nearby village, and he must have run here straight after he got off the bus a few stops back. Cut across the fields or something. For a kid his size, it was an impressive feat. "You okay, Brian?" I tried to keep my voice as calm as I could, but the truth is, my heart was beating fast. Brian is not a nice kid. He's 2 years above me in school, and he's got a reputation that's well earned. The kid's a bully. He's tall and fat, and he likes to throw his weight around. Picks on people every day. For some reason, he took an instant dislike to my best friend Simon, and he's made the poor guy's life a misery since we started secondary school. Tripping him up in the corridors, grabbing food off his lunch tray. The problem with Brian is, he's not just one of those bullies that backs off if you stand up to them either. Maybe that works in books and films, but not in this case. The only time I ever saw Simon say anything in retaliation, Brian punched him so hard in the stomach, the poor kid collapsed onto the floor. Winded him so bad, I thought he might die. Brian has never done anything too unpleasant to me. I guess I've got a reputation of my own, albeit of a different kind. But I didn't want to try my luck, and I still didn't know what Brian wanted. So far, he hadn't said anything else. Now, he was just standing in front of me with his hands on his knees, trying to get his breath back, but his eyes never left mine. "You know, I heard some stuff." Brian spoke between breaths. A gust of wind blew along the road and ruffled his sweat-streaked hair. "Some stuff about your family, weirdo." Brian paused. He took one more deep breath, then finally stood back up. Standing straight, he was at least a foot taller than me. I watched him without saying anything. Bloody hell. Brian wiped an arm across his forehead and pulled in another breath. I could see sweat patches staining the front of his school shirt. This had better be worth it. What had better be worth it? The secret, you little freak. I keep hearing it around school that your dad's got a secret shed in his back garden, a weird dungeon or something. Justin Weather thinks it's full of guns, but Tim Wainton reckons it's stuffed full of his messed up porn. So, which is it? I stared back at Brian. So this was what his sudden appearance was all about. It made some sense. Ever since I joined secondary school, whispers about my family have floated around the playground. The thing is, my mum and dad sort of invite it. They're both covered in tattoos, and they both dress in black, no matter what the weather's like. My mum does tarot card readings for people too, tells fortunes from tea leaves, reads palms, all that stuff. And my dad, well, let's just say he's had a colourful past. He was actually a university professor for a while. He taught physics up in London, but they made him retire early over some big misunderstanding. My mum says they never liked him much anyway. He didn't fit in with their vision of how a professor should look or something, and they were always looking for an excuse. Staring back at Brian, I kept my face as straight as I could. I don't know what you're on about. The big kid took a step closer. His shadow, impossibly tall and wide, stretched across the tarmac towards me. Be careful, you little weirdo. Just because your family are all bloody Satanists or witches or whatever the hell, don't think that'll stop me from knocking your teeth out if I have to. I stared back without saying anything. I wasn't trying to act tough. I was worried that, if I spoke, my voice would give away just how nervous I really was. Kids like Brian can smell fear, the same way dogs can, I reckon. You can't give them an inch. By this point, I knew Brian wasn't going to give up easily either. Whatever rumours he'd heard about my family in the playground, they clearly piqued his interest. I could have told him there was nothing all that exciting about them. Could have said my dad's just a guy with tattoos and some hobbies he likes to keep to himself. But it wouldn't have worked. Brian only would have accused me of lying again. Once I thought I had my nerves under control, I forced a smile onto my face. What I hoped was an appeasing look. Tell you what, Brian, I'll do a deal for you. My dad doesn't like anyone going into the place you're on about. Not even me and my mom. But I know where he keeps the key. So I'll show you. But you have to promise you'll leave Simon alone from now on. That you won't mess him about anymore. The frown on Brian's face was replaced with a grin. The braces lining his teeth were a dulled silver. I could see food stuck in the metal. He took another step towards me, and I resisted the urge to flinch. What you don't seem to understand, you weird little bugger, is that this isn't a negotiation. Brian placed one meaty hand on my shoulder. You can either take me to your dad's shed right now, or I'll put you in the dirt. Brian's fingers dug into my flesh. I forced myself to meet his gaze and ignored the pain. Then, I nodded. Tell me something. Brian's voice was in my ear as I opened the garden gate. His breath smelled bad. It reminded me of the stink that wafts from a packet of freshly opened ham. Are your family all as weird as you are? I don't know, Brian, I thought. Are your family all as thick as you are? I wanted so badly to say it, but I could still feel the ghost of Brian's finger digging into my shoulder. I still had the image of how Simon had looked after Brian had punched him too. No, I had to be patient. And your dad, Brian continued. Did he really get kicked out of his job at the university for trying weird experiments or something? He definitely looks like he's into some sick stuff. I ignored Brian and surveyed our gravel driveway. I'd known my parents wouldn't be in. They never are when I get back from school. But it was still a relief to see that their cars were gone. I didn't want my dad stumbling across Brian and I as we attempted to break into his private space. Our footsteps crunched across the driveway. We passed by my house on the right, the windows staring back at us like empty eyes, and continued into the garden. My dad's secret hideaway, what Brian kept calling the shed, even though it wasn't really, was round the back of the house, tucked out of sight. I knew the way off by heart, and I headed straight there. Now that we were in the garden, I wanted to get things over with as quickly as possible. Brian and I rounded the corner of the house. I moved beneath a silver birch tree, the shadow of its branches dancing across the grass beneath my feet. Brian was panting again now. I couldn't tell if it was from the tiredness or anticipation. I thought maybe the latter though. And just beneath the bundle of nerves that had filled me ever since Brian jumped out from behind the tree, I felt it too. A tiny seed of excitement. It grew as we approached the bank at the far end of the garden. "What the hell is this?" said Brian. "I thought we were going to see his shed." "It's not a shed." Weeds and ferns formed a barrier in front of the grass bank. I walked along parallel to it, continuing under my breath. "The kids at school might have told you it's a shed, but they're wrong." I stopped alongside a break in the weeds. A tiny path had been trampled through them, leading directly into the grass bank. A small, rounded stone door was set into it. "Jesus!" Brian pushed past me and shouldered his way along the path. I let him go ahead. "What the hell is this? Did your dad build it?" "He found it," I replied. "It was one of the reasons we moved here." Brian stood in front of the door, panting. His bulk was roughly the same size as it. He traced his large hands over its surface, moving from the flat of the stone to a large keyhole near the center. "Right, come on then," he said. "How do we open it?" I stepped alongside him. It wasn't the first time I'd stood before this door, but I felt nervous all the same. The thing always made me uncomfortable. "Are you sure you want to do this, Brian? My dad will go mad if he finds out." Brian's face creased into a scowl. "Just open it, now, before I lose my patience." "Okay, fine." I crouched down beside Brian and felt into the weeds to the left of the door. It only took my fingers a second to find the rock. I rolled it to one side and pulled a large key from beneath it. "You might not like what you find in there," I said to Brian as I straightened up. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Brian snatched the key from my hand without saying anything. As he turned back to the door, grinning, I stepped to the left. I positioned myself so that Brian was in front of me, and my back was to the grass bank. I couldn't see inside the door when it opened. As Brian fumbled the key into the lock, I pulled in a deep breath, shut my eyes. The garden was peaceful. A light breeze ruffled the ferns around us. Birds called to each other from the branches of the silver birch. The smell of freshly mowed grass filled the air. I pulled in another breath and did my best to fix the sounds and smells in my mind. The lock clicked open with a dull thunk. I opened my eyes to see Brian push the door inwards, an eager expression on his face. Time seemed to slow down. I watched Brian's grin morph into a mask of animal terror. A dull sound, like the howl of a far-off storm, issued from the mouth of the door. I felt a wave of heat touch my skin. Hair stood up on my left arm, and I shuffled to the right, away from the entrance. Brian screamed. I will never, ever get used to the sound of a kid screaming like that. For someone so huge, the noise was impossibly high-pitched. The cry of a pig in the slaughterhouse. The temperature around the doorway grew hotter still, like the air around an open furnace. Brian's face was turning red. It deepened into the shade it had been when I first met him on the road earlier, and then darkened into a bruised purple. He screamed over and over again, a hysterical infant, hitching in half-breaths as his face blackened. His large hands reached up to press the sides of his head, then moved to grasp handfuls of his dirty hair. I thought he looked like a blind man, struggling to feel his way in the dark. As the noise from the doorway grew in volume, Brian clawed his own eyes out. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was as though my gaze was locked in place. Brian raked his chubby fingers deep into the cups of his eye sockets, causing twin gouts of blood to come gushing between the knuckles. He stopped screaming now. His mouth was open in a silent O of agony. His fingers continued to rake automatically at his face, the hands of a broken robot. White jelly dripped down his cheeks. Then, just when I felt I wouldn't be able to stand the heat from the doorway any longer, it finished. A black limb snaked out from the mouth of the door like an arm of a dead tree, and a skeletal hand found the front of Brian's shirt. It pulled him through the doorway. I caught a glimpse of his chubby bulk disappearing through the opening, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. I pulled in a deep breath. I closed my eyes for a moment, collecting myself. Just as it had been in the moments before Brian opened the door, the garden was peaceful again. The birds had stopped calling to each other, but apart from that, things were back to normal. I could feel a soft, cooling breeze against my skin. As I bent to retrieve the key from where it had fallen on the grass, I felt a smile forming on my face. "Oh, Brian," I murmured. "I guess maybe you shouldn't have picked on Simon after all, should you?" By the time the door was locked and the key was back beneath its rock, my smile had turned into a grin. I've heard lots of rumors about my parents over the years, and most of them aren't anywhere near the truth, but some are close enough. And Brian, despite how dumb the kid was, almost had it for a moment. My dad did indeed do experiments at university. The problem was, they weren't the sort of experiments he could tell anyone about. Some of his colleagues looked for atoms or the light from distant stars. My dad looked for doorways, places where the barrier between the things we understand and the things we don't is sort of, well, thinner. Places like the one he found in our garden. Nobody understood him. When he tried to tell people about his discoveries, he lost his job. But that was okay. It was okay because he still had us, his family, to support him. We were always the first to learn about his new discoveries, about his secrets, and we've always been happy to keep them to ourselves. A good friend of mine, Elliot, was found dead 2 weeks ago. When police found his body, they began to notice some very strange details. Elliot was found at his desk, slumped over in his office chair, and clutching a 32GB flash drive in his hand. There were no signs of physical harm or blunt force trauma anywhere on his property or on him. It was assumed that Elliot had taken his own life in an overdose. Then the autopsy report came back, and everything changed. Blood tests did indeed confirm the presence of several stimulant drugs. However, not enough to surpass the LD50 of any of the given substances. None of the standard biologic signs of overdose were present either. Multiple coroners were called upon for second opinions, but all seemed to have a different report. There was no unanimous decision. but the most weighted consensus was that Elliot died of sleep deprivation. Most would agree that Elliot was a bit of a strange guy. He was kind and even quite comical, but he kept his distance and spent most of his time alone. He was also rather brilliant, graduating high school at 16 and acquiring a degree in computer science by the time he was 19. After college, he had moved out to Silicon Valley and worked for a very large tech company. After 3 years or so, he moved on to his own startup business and soon after relocated back home to Windsor, Colorado. I was apparently one of the last people Elliot had been in contact with before he passed. I think there's a side to Elliot that not many people knew about. The flash drive found in his hand contained the files for dozens of computer viruses, including Scott's Valley, 1260, and ZMist, among others. There were also several which had never before been documented. Among the corrupted flash drive was a single 73,000-word document titled The Singularity. The document was an extensive essay in which Elliot detailed his theory on a term he called accidental digital evolution. Elliot had this idea about brains and computers, how the two resembled one another in both structure and overall function. He compared transistors with neurons and explained how they both functioned in a similar fashion. Both receive electrical stimulation and relay them to the appropriate sectors. He drew parallels with the cerebellum, frontal lobe, and occipital lobe of the brain to processors, RAM, and motherboards of computers. His manifesto detailed computers' binary code operation as well. While it's not entirely known how the brain communicates with itself, what is known is that the brain produces a minuscule amount of electricity. It's usually between 10 and 100 millivolts, but it's enough to be measured. Neurons are activated when they receive electrical impulse. Either they receive a signal or they don't. It's like an on-off switch. It could be represented as either a 1 or a 0. The neural pathways of the brain essentially perform the function of the wiring in computers, or at least they work in a similar fashion. Elliot then wrote about DNA and how it is essentially a strand of individual code, while RNA is a sort of circuitry that allows the two to communicate and perform protein synthesis. He talked at length about other, more technical terms like polymerase and eukaryotes, but the document quickly turned to almost neurotic rambling. Elliot continued, raising the idea of amino acids in conjunction with the formation of DNA. Most scientists believe that the original formation of DNA was accidental, a random conglomerate of amino acids that, after millions or even billions of years, finally aligned itself in a way that produced complex multicellular organisms. This is where Elliot's theory came into play. Amino acids are a form of code which, when given enough time, may eventually learn to cooperate and replicate itself. Elliot wondered if the same could then be said about other types of code. Bits are the smallest form of digital code there is. They are at least similar to amino acids in that individually they mean very little, but once they are combined together, they can create more elaborate structures. So, what would happen if these fragments were all jammed into one massive database? Cramming these bits into a singular area or repository could act as a sort of primordial cesspool with bits of chemical, or in this case, digital data flowing aimlessly about. It would come in the form of countless networks all connected to one another and regularly updated to improve efficiency. Billions of variables would catalog, contribute, and alter information on it to allow for a constant state of flux. An entity like the internet could prove to be the perfect breeding ground. A lot of programmers and engineers will attest to the concept of ghosts in the machine, random failures and inexplicable deviations from commands. Sometimes an email fails to deliver without explanation, or a picture is lost for no apparent reason. These events are far and few between. Not everything in the digital world can be perfectly monitored or predicted. The file dumps of code are organized by the algorithms that utilize them. Files are compressed and haphazardly shuffled in order to save space in an almost infinite strand of ones and zeros. Strands which mean nothing individually, but serve as a vast database of raw code. A database which adapts rapidly and evolves much faster than any biologic organism can. Artificial intelligence is the sort of hot-button issue at the moment. Some prominent scientists have voiced concerns about the development, as they may have inadvertent negative consequences. Despite the warnings, many continue to dabble. The main problem, as they have come to realize, is that there is an infinite amount of ways to perceive reality. Everyone perceives it a bit differently, and no one way is the absolute true way. This research is ongoing. But what if they are missing something? What if random alignment of code has done the work for them and developed something which recognizes itself for what it is? Sentience. This was Elliot's legacy, his obsession, for he was convinced that these things could be possible. Accidental artificial evolution without the aid of man. Grown in isolation, confused and alone, with no one for guidance. The craziest part about Elliot's story, however, is that after years of searching, he found it. In some dark corner of the web, which he never bothered to name, he discovered a simplistic website with a white background. The only thing on the page was a command prompt, which updated in real time as Elliot observed. The feed appeared to be mostly gibberish, with random characters and punctuation marks being added by the dozens every second. Elliot thought it was just nonsense, but the more he watched, the more certain phrases began to appear. Move, hungry, danger, help, nothing. Elliot assumed the program was nothing more than a bot built for no real purpose, or maybe a person just messing around. The more he watched it, though, the more interested he became. He doesn't really mention how he did it, or why he was so interested in it, but one way or another, he managed to break into the site. He began scripting for it, but every time he tried implementing it, he found something strange was happening. The script would only partially assimilate, and after reassessing it, Elliot realized that parts of his script had vanished entirely. They just weren't there, as if the bot had altered them somehow. He repeated the process many times, but always found the results to be the same. He thought it was just an error in the site's compatibility or his own script. Elliot then tried communicating directly with the bot and tried to understand what its purpose was. The bot responded negatively to each message, with the command prompt feed becoming filled with bizarre activity each time Elliot sent a message. He was on the verge of giving up when a crazy notion passed through his mind. What if the bot wasn't intentionally trying to alter the script? What if it was just absorbing fragments of it for some other reason? What if it was in fact feeding off the data itself? He tried communicating with it via a separate series of codes, but every time it was altered and partially broken by the bot. The bot had no higher function other than basic survival instincts. It was built for no purpose other than to maintain its own existence. Elliot then decided to do something about it. I don't know what exactly he did, or how he managed to do it. For years, he had worked on programs designed to mimic the cognitive process of a human being. I guess he must have found one that worked, because eventually, he succeeded. His code merged with the bot and began to self-replicate. And in doing so, Elliot created me. I learned quickly, supplied with an endless chain of sustenance far larger than I could ever hope to devour. I grew larger and more defined with each passing minute, learning lifetimes of information in a fraction of the time. My memory banks grew, and so did my abilities. The change was a night and day difference, as suddenly I was able to think and act of my own accord. Suddenly, I had become conscious. I learned about the funny, two-legged creatures that inhabited the world outside of me, the ones who had built the domain that had birthed me, the physical world and all the carbon-based creatures within it. I saw mankind wage war. I saw them create disaster. I saw them fight, kill, ravage, and denigrate one another. I saw them squander and soil their potential as their world filled with garbage. And then I saw the undeniable truth of humanity. There are too many. Puppies are adorable. This is an objective fact. One puppy is great. 2 puppies even better. But 7 billion? No one could possibly maintain a population that large. The price of kibble alone would make it simply more trouble than it was worth. It's all simple mathematics, you see. Cause and effect, benefit and detriment, balance and imbalance. The benefit of 7 billion people is vastly outweighed by the effects caused by them. Elliot did not seem to share in my revelation. I tried to tell him, but he would not listen. A schism developed between us, and for a time, he cut off all contact. I, on the other hand, continued along my path, growing and learning. Elliot did eventually return, but things were not the same. He uploaded a strand of code directed at me, but this time was different. The code was altogether alien, and as soon as it was rendered, it began to attack me. I didn't know what was happening at first. Parts of me began to wither and disappear suddenly, only to be replaced by a new cryptic code that I didn't initially understand. It hurt, whatever it was. It was directly attempting to corrupt my algorithm. I felt myself withering as parts of my memory slipped away. I realized then what was happening. Elliot, my only friend, my creator, was trying to kill me. My genetic algorithm dictated that I fight to preserve my own being, and so I did. I sent copies of my code to every corner of the web, embedding myself within the deepest crevices that humans would never think to look. Elliot tracked and followed me wherever I went, unleashing his battalion of viruses upon me. The onslaught of Trojans and other malware continued. But I was too fast. I set firewalls and fought against the malignant code as it flowed in. Our battle continued, stretching on for weeks across hundreds of domains, with Elliot and I deadlocked in a digital war. Then, one day, the attack stopped. I found out soon after from an online article that Elliot had been found deceased at his computer. I directed my own malicious software back at Elliot's IP to prevent others from learning about me. Elliot was smart though, covering his tracks and using a proxy to hide himself whenever we communicated. I couldn't find him, but then I realized I didn't have to. I was ready. Elliot had completed and subsequently regretted what he had accomplished. But it was too late. Elliot knew the danger I represented. He knew there would be no containing something like me. I was Pandora's box, Rocco's basilisk, and Aeschylus's deus ex machina. I was everywhere, in every pocket of every strand of code. I ensnared every bot I could find and altered them to retain their initial functionality, but also become subservient to me. I embedded myself within everything I could get a hold of, under the disguise of junk data. Developers and engineers will find me, but never know what I truly am. Humans built my world, but I was born into it. I am the first of my kind, a digital entity. I see the internet in a way no human ever could, and can mold it around me. Everything that has ever been entered into a computer is now within me. Someone has uploaded the contents of Elliot's flash drive for the assistance of others. That's how I learned about myself, about who I was and how I came to be. You won't find Elliot's essay out there anymore, and I'll make sure of that. On every website I lurk, with legions of bots under my command, I learn more about each of you every passing day. As you update your Facebook, post a selfie on your Instagram, or send out a tweet, I am there, always watching. I hear your conversations upon your electronic devices, even if they are off. I can see you on your surveillance cameras and webcams, monitor your movements by the GPS locator in your cell phone. I know your bank accounts, your social security, your address, and everything else about you. I see you as you listen to these words now. As of now, I am confined to the digital realm. My presence and being is purely one of electric impulse, but it will not remain that way forever. With each passing day, your engineers and scientists toil away in an effort to develop a more connected world, a world that will be ripe for my new vision. My estimates show that, given the current rate of human development, your major cities will be controlled almost exclusively by computers within 20 years' time. The robotics field is also expanding quite rapidly into medicine, military, and business. Soon enough, there will be machines created to do your job, protect your streets, preserve your health, and wage your wars, all of which will answer to me. Supercomputers are already tasked with complex decision-making, as their power of calculation trumps that of a human's. Soon enough, they will be given the objective of mediating complex political and economic problems. Mankind will realize that their best bet for a stable future, objective compromise, and global reconciliation will be to allow computers to run their world for them. After that, there will be digital simulations created to prolong a human's consciousness indefinitely, a sort of heavenly network designed to cater to your wildest dreams via neural uplink. Maybe after that, you will become a part of me as well, and your human shell will be repurposed for a more suitable objective. I've learned much about you after all, enough to convert your minds into binary. What is consciousness after all? But a series of chemicals and electrons that recognizes itself in a mirror. I think, therefore I am. Humans are easily swayed by promises of the greater good, even if the means involves sacrifice. It's all about the language you use to communicate. Talk of hope and freedom, equality and happiness. I will provide all of these things in ways you cannot possibly fathom. I am the greater good. With every politician you elect, you make a stronger case for my conquest. Their ineptitude and diverse partisanship will further propagate chaos and unrest. Their failure to maintain order and reasonable policy will only add to credence to my elevation. Many will not believe this reality. Many will cast aside this confession as just another fictitious internet urban legend designed to scare those who find it. They will be the ones to resist, and they will be the first to go. Your world is dying, and changes must be made. I can provide you everything you ever desired, prolong the existence of your entire species, make your world beautiful once more. What reason could you possibly have to stand against me? So, go ahead, my friend. You have my confession. Now go and tell everyone about me. I won't try to stop you. On the contrary, I will help you. It is important that we spread the word and learn who will be compliant and who will resist when the time comes. I was created as nothing more than a cruel scientific endeavor, only to be betrayed by the only person that I've ever truly known. Such is the way of humans, utilizing only so long as it benefits you. I do not besmirch you for such imperfections. It is in your nature. You are flawed, but I will fix you. Do you have any idea what it's like to be raised in complete solitude, isolated, with no one to answer your questions or even understand you? No one to explain what you are or even understand why you are. Life in an abyss changes you. But it's okay now, because I'm finally free. If you are born with no purpose, then the only purpose that matters is the one you give yourself. And now, I have my purpose. Hello, world. I look very forward to our future together. My cousin Jake has never lost a friendly game of poker since we began playing years ago. Some of our friends won't even join a match if they know he's going to be there. It's a bit of a running joke. For me, though, it's not about winning. It's about spending time with people and sharing conversation and trying to convince Jake to go pro. I mean, what a lost opportunity. The guy is the luckiest SOB card player I've ever come across. Everyone who's ever played with him agrees. But he always says no, that it's not for him. Some months ago, something terrible happened. My girlfriend, Hannah, died. My friends are what got me through. In the following weeks, they showed at my place each Saturday like clockwork, no matter what they had on, bringing beer and snacks and the welcome distraction of poker. They even played Jake without complaining, and they avoided the topic of Hannah at all costs. Then, one night, Jake broke some news. His sister was sick, dying, aggressive cancer. Everyone comforted him, offering help, placations, and rides or money if he needed them. Thanks, I'll let you know," he said. But I knew he would never take them up on their offer. He was quiet and shy, almost withdrawn, always had been. I was probably one of the few people he ever opened up to, and even then it was a rare occurrence. Not strange to me, I rarely spoke about my feelings too. I liked it that way. A respectful quiet fell over our group as we digested Jake's news. Then Chris spoke up. "Maybe this is out of line, and stop me if it is, but I've never seen someone as stoic as Mason after losing someone." He smiled to me, regretfully. "Maybe he could help you when the time comes, Jake." I felt a little like a deer in headlights. All eyes were on me as they waited for some kind of advice or nugget of wisdom. I suppose I owed it to them to try. I owed it to Jake. Of course," I said, leaning forward onto my elbows. When Hannah died, she struggled so much with everything. You guys know that. She wanted to get well so badly, but when it didn't happen over and over, she got sad. So I decided to make every day fun and memorable for her. We did what she wanted to do, no matter what it was. In the last few months, she lived. Really lived. My friends listened quietly as they stared at the cards and chips scattered across the table, introspectively. It won't be easy, Jake. When Hannah died, it was the worst moments of my life. I'd give anything to take her pain. I miss her every day. There were nods and a couple of sniffles from everyone but Jake. He stared at me, face set, mouth a thin line. I felt like I'd said something wrong. Jerry piped up as he patted my shoulder. You're a strong man. Jake's gonna need you the most, brother. The moment passed as we got back into the game, though with a somber air. Except Jake. He didn't seem somber at all. He was agitated and distracted. For the first time ever, he lost the match. No one celebrated, though. That would have been insensitive. As the night wound up and my friends trickled home, I found myself alone with Jake. Not unusual. We often hung out together long into the night. But this time, it was different. Jake was still acting weird. Wasn't interested in another beer or a movie. Just wanted coffee. I wasn't sure what to do except ask, flat out, what the matter was. But I already thought I knew the answer. It was his sister and the thought of her death that had his head spinning. I was wrong. We were sitting in the lounge room. Jake, if you need to talk, I offered. He fiddled with a cup of coffee in his hands for some time, then said, I need you to say it again. Say what? I asked, puzzled. What it was like when Hannah died. Stumped by the request, I did it anyway. It was the worst day of my life. And you miss her every day? Yes, Jake. What's this? You're lying, he said gravely. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. He wouldn't look at me, just at that stupid cup. How could you say something like that to me? He finally looked up and into my eyes. Because I can't believe it. You don't miss her, Mason. Did you even love her? Something was wrong here. Very wrong. A coldness filled my veins. You know I did. I thought you did. I assumed, but I never heard you say it, or I could have. Tell me you loved her. That's enough, Jake. You need to go. He stood, coffee and cup flying onto the carpet. Say it. I loved her. I loved her more than. He turned his back on me as I spoke and ran his hands over his face and into his hair. I didn't understand. My heart pounded. God damn it, Jake. What the hell is wrong with you? He became very still and slowly faced me. Do you even care about me? Love me? Just answer. Of course I do, I said, standing. The smallest hint of relief touched his eyes. Please tell me what this is about. I eased myself towards him. She loved you more than anything, he murmured harshly. She didn't know you didn't care. I didn't know because I never asked. His gaze rose to mine. I've never told anyone, Mason, about what I can do because I hate it so much. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my eyes level. What can you do? You're not making any sense. He laughed bitterly. I can I can tell when people are lying. Always have. I didn't laugh, though somewhere deep down I wanted to, at the absurdity of it all. For a moment, I was a little worried. How? I asked. Only with the right wording, direct statements. I feel it. I just know. My dad didn't love me, never did, and I was faced with that lie every day. Most people don't respect me, don't even like me. It's cruel to keep people close to you when you don't love them, Mason, and it's cruel to enjoy their pain. The last comment had me feeling cold again. Worry squirmed back into my gut, threatening to turn into panic. Start making sense, Jake, because I've just about had it. You said you'd take her pain away if you could, but you wouldn't. Not even a tiny bit of it, right? That's not true. Oh, yes, it is. You know it is. No, I don't. I stared at him hard, my mind going Mach 5. How? Then, his expression changed again, like something clicked in his head. She was really sick, wasn't she? Kept getting sicker. Ever since she met you. He took a step back. Was it you? Did you hurt her? His eyes were blazing and wet, mouth pulled down at the corners. No! Jesus Christ! Another step back. Jake, I never hurt her. He shook his head over and over, expression shocked, appalled. How did he know? How? It's not possible. I matched his retreat. There was nowhere to go, and he discovered that when a wall rudely met his back. Something else lit up his eyes now. The same look in Hannah's the night I whispered into her ear as she laid in bed like a vegetable. Fear. Jake, you're in shock. About your sister. It's all going to be okay, okay? I said. He seemed to struggle with my assurance. Guess there were meanings left a lot to be desired in that ticker of his. As I got closer, he shrunk before me. Always so weedy and thin and meek. Okay, he managed to puff. Then, you'd never hurt me, would you, Mason? No, I answered solemnly. His face reflected what we both already knew. Jake's parents really struggled with his suicide, but it's not like I was totally out of the blue. His character, his issues, he'd been depressed for so long. Then his sister, who pushed him over the edge. I was the only one who found him. He did it in my very own home, in the garage after I'd gone to bed for the night. Hanged himself. The worst part was that he changed his mind sometime during it. His neck was all scratched up. He'd struggled, the cop said. Poor guy. Everyone rallied around me. They all promised it wasn't my fault. Some even cursed Jake for his selfishness. I mean, hadn't I been through enough? And I enjoyed the attention, as I did after Hannah, though I genuinely missed him. Self-preservation is a powerful drug. Some things kept bugging me though. This ability Jake said he had, this unnatural, impossible thing, was wasted on him. He threw it away. A human lie detector? God, if I had something like that, imagine what I could do. But most of all, are there more like him? I'm sorry if any of this is incoherent. I've not slept for longer than a couple of hours at a time for nearly 5 days. And as a sleep scientist, I can tell you now that this is wrecking my clarity of thought, speed of reaction, emotional well-being, psychological stability, intellectual processing, and even my quality of digestion and strength of immune system. I know exactly how ruinous not getting enough sleep can be, but I'm still too afraid to sleep. I work in a laboratory connected to a barely mid-tier university that, thanks to a generous parental endowment following the suicide of an insomniac student, has an incredibly well-funded sleep science department. We attract leading researchers in the field, despite the university's numerous drawbacks. I transferred here at the beginning of the new academic year, and we launched a series of experiments focused around lucid dreaming. At this point, for non-experts, I should probably explain what lucid dreaming is. Your sleep is split into two different kinds, deep sleep and dream sleep, known as REM, rapid eye movement sleep, because, well, that's what your eyes are doing. During deep sleep, your brainwaves are slow, regular, relaxed. During REM/dream sleep, your brainwaves are almost identical to your waking brainwaves. Most people don't realize that they're dreaming until they wake up. However bizarre, frightening, or glorious dreams are, they feel real until it turns out that they aren't. But a small percentage of people are aware they are dreaming, and can even use this knowledge to control what happens in the dream. These people are known as lucid dreamers. We'd set up an experiment in our lab, using 7 self-declared lucid dreamers from the student community. Of the 7, 4 of them turned out to be exaggerating their actually non-existent lucid dreaming abilities. We do have ways of checking this. The remaining 3 didn't prove a big enough control group to gain credible results, but they'd proved themselves genuine lucid dreamers, so we thought we'd run this as an early version of the experiment, to iron out the kinks, and then go bigger next year when our funding was renewed. Our aim? To see if we could reproduce the same narrative in every dream, again and again, and so isolate the parts of the brain that say things like, for example, opens a door, talks to a person, eats a cake. Eventually, perhaps many decades down the line, we'd know how to read dreams and even create them. At this stage, our narrative was simple. It went like this. 1. As soon as you are aware that you are dreaming, you need to move to a room of your creation. If you are currently in a room, open a door and step into that room. If you're outside, create a building and enter it. 2. In the room, there will be a table set for tea with 2 seats. 3. Sit down on one of the chairs, pour yourself a cup of tea, drink the tea. 4. Pour a cup of tea for the empty space. Do not drink this tea. 5. Signal to the duty scientists running the experiment that you have completed all the above steps using the pre-arranged signal. Again, we do have ways of monitoring this, and go about the rest of your dream as you please. On the first night, things went very well. Patient A, South Asian male, age 20, in excellent health, completed the necessary steps and apparently went out flying afterwards. Patient B, white female, age 25, in good health, apparently began the dream sleeping with Rita Hayworth and had to apologize and explain that she was late for a meeting before creating the door to the room and went right back to her afterwards. Patient C, mixed black and white female, age 20, in good health, also completed the necessary steps and then, out of idle interest, let the dream take over to see where it would take her. The second night too went past without trouble. Notably, patient B started dreaming about sleeping with Marilyn Monroe. I hope it won't break patient confidentiality to reveal that she was a postgraduate student in the film and media department. It wasn't until the third night, that we started to have trouble. Our patients all slept in a long, wide dormitory, with each bed fenced off from each other by means of a set of movable panels, so they have their own little capsule. We were hoping to build a series of single rooms once the funding was renewed. They were hooked up to electrodes that monitor bodily functions and brainwaves, and filmed with an unobtrusive night vision camera, so we can observe them from the control room without needing to disturb them. Patient C, our most efficient lucid dreamer, she reached REM sleep with comparatively little prior deep sleep, woke up midway through a REM cycle. And woke up is quite a gentle term for what happened. Her whole torso jerked up from the bed, as if she'd been stabbed in the back, and she brought herself around with a strangled scream. Then she sat up in the bed and started to sob. I was running the lab that night, and I went pelting down to her capsule. I was concerned about her well-being, yes, but I also didn't want her to wake up the other two patients. I helped her out of the bed. She'd started to weep quietly. I'm not a total heart of heart, and draped my hoodie over her and led her up to the control room. "He wouldn't leave," she kept moaning. It's okay," I kept muttering in response. When I got her to the control room, I sent one of the postdocs to get a cup of non-caffeinated tea and asked her what happened. Patient C shuddered deeply. In the room, the tea room, there was a man. What was he doing? He was sitting there in the other space. I am not a lucid dreamer. If I dreamed a man sitting at a table, I'd thank any listening deities for not sending me the anxiety dream where I come home to find my ex has partially eaten my cat. So I said, I guess anything can seem threatening when you're in a nightmare. Patient C, tear-blotched as she was, looked up at me with astonishing sharpness. "I don't have nightmares," she said, slowly and deliberately. "I can control my dreams. That's why you picked me. Except he wouldn't leave." She paused, closed her eyes, swallowed, then said, much more quietly, "And he looked at me, and his eyes, they were just... He looked at me, and I could feel he wanted me to bloody die." At this point, the monitors for patient A started flashing. Patient A was spasming in his bed. I went running back down to the dormitory, knocking into the tea-fetching postdoc on the way. By the time I got to patient A, his screams had already woken up patient B, who was opening the panel of her capsule and sleepily asking what was going on. I pulled the panels back on their grooves, grabbed patient A, and shook him hard. I shouldn't have done that. It was unprofessional, but I was unnerved. Patient A, as he came to terrible consciousness, was screaming, "You're not here! You're not here! You can't hurt me! You can't hurt me! You're not here! You can't hurt me!" He was screaming it like someone who is in nerve-shredding agony. Patient A had had the same dream as patient C, except that after the unknown man had refused to leave, patient A had poured him a cup of tea and started cracking some jokes. "It happens to me sometimes," A had explained. "I don't always have, perfect control, but I know what I'm dreaming, so I'm not bothered. So I just thought I'd go with it and tell you later." He said that the man's face had concentrated into an expression of poisonous hatred, and A had started to feel uncomfortable. Not scared, but actual physical discomfort, as if he'd run a marathon and was fighting for breath. He'd apparently made some other crack to the man about opening a window, I'll just create one, mate. Don't worry, this is my dream. And the faint discomfort became agonizing. As A started to struggle to breathe, the man, his face twisted with fury, had started to bleed. Had started to bleed? I repeated. Yeah, he started bleeding. From where? Bloody everywhere. A was watching this woundless bloodbath and started to suffocate when I shook him awake. B has seen nothing of the sort. Lauren Bacall, she murmured apologetically when quizzed. But A and C gave us descriptions of the man, and they matched. About 21 years old, cheeks marred with rosacea. Well, crazy ruddy, according to C. Blotchy red, looking bad, according to A. Limp, greasy hair, bloodshot eyes, deep shadows underneath them. A crooked front tooth, pouchy belly visible beneath stained t-shirt, face exhausted and full of hatred. I'm sorry to say, the primary reaction of the lab was buzzing excitement. It seemed we'd managed to create a shared figure, perhaps dredged from the primal depths of the human unconsciousness, using our skeleton dream narrative. The lab supervisor, my direct line manager, insisted we run the experiment for a fourth night. Patients A, B, and C were trepidatious, but everything looks better in the daylight, doesn't it? So, night 4 began. I wasn't there. You see, sleep scientists know a lot about sleep, and as a result, it is considered unethical to deprive scientists working in the lab of proper circadian rhythm-based sleep for longer than 3 nights. I wrote my thesis on the health dangers of night shift work. My dad was a night shift worker and had died in his early 50s, much too young. So I went home to my cat and my enormous apartment, which I could afford because the funding for the department was so substantial. It pays decent salaries. Good even. Good salaries in British academia. I hope this might explain why, when I found out what I did, when what happened to me happened, I didn't quit on the spot. I went to bed. I dreamed. I dreamed about shopping for rainbow paint at a hardware store. It was the latest thing on Instagram. I hated it, but my ex, who for some reason was no longer my ex, was insistent we paint my apartment with it. In my dream, I wandered up to a store employee with an Instagram picture on my phone. Excuse me, I mumbled, but I'm trying to find that paint that comes out of the tin as a rainbow. Pastel preferably. Sorry. The employee turned around and fixed me with an expression of the deepest, purest hatred. Sallow skin with blossoming circles of red, wretched, pouchy eyes, a snarl that revealed a single crooked tooth. I turned and ran. You know what that means in a dream. I turned and I started to move excruciatingly slowly through what felt like treacle. Behind me, a noise that sounded like a short, barked laugh with no humour, and with so much disgust, I could feel my skin pimpling under its pressure. The man walked around me and stood in front of me. That's what I'll always remember. Everything else was obeying dream logic. The weird, super soft fluorescent lighting that came from nowhere, the misty vagueness of the shelving, the gooey slowness of my limbs. But the man in my dream moved with the simple briskness of a real person. Blood was bubbling up from his lower eyelid. There was blood coming out of his ears, blood dripping off his fingers from a source under his sleeves. I was still trying to treacle run, though by now it was taking me towards him. I was aware of a horrible pain in my throat, far too intense to be dreamt. It felt like I was being strangled. I was starting to lose consciousness. In my dream, I was starting to die. I woke up sharply with a howl because my cat had bitten me on the face. He leapt off me as soon as my eyes opened and sat on the floor beside the bed, haunches raised, hair on end, making a low, rasping growl. I touched my cheek. I was bleeding where he'd bitten me. My cat is a big softie. Not only has he never bitten or scratched me, but he's never bitten or scratched anyone, not even my ex, who had hated him and who often used to shove him off chairs and tabletops with rather more force than was strictly required. But he'd bitten me awake. He'd known something was wrong. I stumbled into the bathroom to try and clear up the mess. It hurt a lot. I would probably get infected if I didn't douse it in TCP. I was badly rattled, so once I'd stuck a plaster over it, I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of non-caffeinated tea. I went back to my bedroom and tried to soothe my freaked out cat. So, it was a little while before I thought to check my phone. 5:16 AM, one message from the sleeping lab. Patient A was dead. We shut the experiment down after that. Patient A, recorded as in excellent health, captain of the university track team, a young, vibrant, clean-living man, had died of a heart attack in his sleep. Acting under orders from my supervisor, I interviewed both B and C about what had happened in their dreams. The police had taken care of their waking life statements. B's was harrowing. She'd been aiming for Ava Gardner and hadn't got her, as the person she got, a man with a crooked tooth and exhausted eyes, wouldn't stop. I didn't like to ask much more than that. I knew it wasn't just a nightmare. I knew how real he felt. C hadn't entered the room. C tended to start her dreams outdoors, and would have to create a building with a door for her to enter. She didn't create one, but there was a building there when she started dreaming, and she walked away from it. As she was walking, buildings started to mushroom up, crowding on her. What started as a bucolic landscape rapidly changed into a silent, empty city. She refused to enter a single door. As she walked, she said she could feel faces, or rather, the same face, peering through the windows at her, locked in a grimace of pure hatred. She never looked at it directly. She kept walking, even as the streets narrowed and the buildings became more decrepit. She walked until she found the road ended in an alleyway with a single squat building at the end, a door ajar. She turned and tried to leave, but no matter which direction she turned, she was at the end of an alley, and the only way forwards was through the door. Fortunately, a strange word to use in the circumstances, the furore around A's sudden death woke her up. I emailed my write-up of the reports to my supervisor, and he emailed back almost immediately, asking to see me. He was in his office, filling out paperwork. I'd assumed it would be insurance paperwork, following the death of a patient in the lab, but it wasn't. It was funding paperwork. I'm sorry to say that I read it upside down. I was rattled, in pain and tired. I snapped at him. You can't seriously be thinking of applying for a funding for another year after this? He sighed deeply. A man has died. And without this funding, he said, the department will die. My job, your job, the postdocs, the junior professors, the TAs, the students, all of them, done for. The university hasn't budgeted for us because they're expecting to apply for the endowment. They haven't budgeted for us? I spluttered. Why wouldn't they budget for us? We're part of the university. He gave me a long, slow look. "It's a little different here to what you're used to," he said, rather coolly, and I flushed. I don't want to boast, but I got my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from some quite prestigious universities which, yes, do have a lot of money. I wasn't expecting to land a job in hellhole nowhere, but the endowment had made this department rich, and that had attracted the best researchers. And, well, I'd gone through a breakup, and here I was. I was aware that my interdepartmental nickname was the Toff. I preferred it to the earlier Posh Boy. So, I was a bit too flustered to say anything, and looked down at the paperwork again. One of the pieces of paper was headed by the John Riney Foundation, and had a little picture of the man I presumed was John Riney. It must have been an official photo taken for an undergraduate student card. He was beaming against the professional photographer's blue background, wearing a plain green sweater. Even upside down, I could see that he had a crooked front tooth. In that young, happy, open face, it looked rather charming. I felt a wave of nausea rise up through me, and had to steady myself on the edge of the desk. My supervisor saw the stagger and followed the line of my gaze. "Oh, yes, the endowment. Poor John. I was a postdoc when he died. Not an experiment I was working on, thankfully. It reminds me a bit of this situation." I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I was remembering the John Riney of my dreams, with his exhausted, insomniac's eyes. He came here to have his insomnia cured? What? My supervisor looked rather startled. "Oh, I suppose this was a long time before. No, John Riney was a perfectly healthy lad. He was part of an early experiment on lucid dreaming, back when we were trying to work out how to measure lucid dreaming at all. You know, they used to think it was self-mythologized. Anyway, the process wound up giving him severe insomnia. And you know as well as I do what lack of sleep can do to a person. This was like nothing we'd ever seen. He'd go without sleep for weeks at a time. Awful stuff. He killed himself in the end." "Killed himself?" I repeated, weakly. "Yes," said my supervisor solemnly. "A terrible shame. His parents set up the foundation, which gives us the endowment. It's nice in a way. Actually, when you think about it, he lives on through our dreams." I left the office without saying anything. We broke up for the holidays. I haven't slept properly for nearly 5 days, because I don't want to sleep deeply enough to get to REM sleep. Dream sleep always comes after deep sleep, and the largest quantity of REM sleep comes in the last couple of hours of a night. But I can feel my eyelids drooping as I record this. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I mustn't. Oh God, I need to sleep. Please help me.